And we're live. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll get going here in a few minutes. We're just going to give time for everybody to hop on out of their last meeting or grab their lunch.
Okay, it's 12:03. I think we can go ahead and get started. First, some housekeeping. All participants are in listen-only mode. So if you have questions or comments, please utilize the chat and we will address those. The webinar is being recorded. And all the slides and a link to the recording will be sent to all registered guests and will be available on the YouTube channel. So welcome. I am Dr. Mayworthy Thomas. I am one of the board members of the Nevada Housing Coalition, and I'm also the Affordable Housing Advocate for the State of Nevada Housing Division. So I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to the kickoff of the Nevada Housing Coalition's Lunch and Learn series. As you know, the Nevada Housing Coalition is a statewide member-based nonprofit created to find solutions to the affordable housing crisis. We do this through three strategic priorities: education, advocacy, and collaboration. This particular Lunch and Learn series is part of our education and collaboration work, and we are thankful for all of your support. If you are not yet a member, we invite you to join. You can do so on our website at nvhousingcoalition.org, and that will also be in the chat if you didn't catch that. So for now, the Coalition's Lunch and Learn series will be held virtually on the fourth Wednesday of every month from 12 to 12:45. We don't want to take up a complete hour of your time. We strive to make our topics timely and relevant. Our planning team would love to hear from you about what topics you'd like to see us cover. If you have an idea, please submit it in the chat, or you can email our executive director, Christine Hess, who has placed her information in the chat. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Hilary Lopez of Praxis Consulting, a consulting firm that helps organizations put together the financing of many of Nevada's affordable housing development projects. Hilary is also an active member of our event planning team at the Coalition. So without further ado, Hilary, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you, May. Thank you everyone for being here. It's very exciting to kick off our Lunch and Learn series. And I'm also very excited to introduce this topic as well as Dr. Fadali. I have been involved with the annual housing plan report for a long time. First in the early 2000s as part of a group in Northern Nevada that was advocating for the progress report as part of the legislation that was being provided, and then moving to the Nevada Housing Division and being the staff person responsible for implementing the progress report once that legislation was implemented, and then now as a practitioner and user of the report information. So for those who are unfamiliar with the report, it provides some helpful data to understand the tools the subject jurisdictions are using to support affordable housing and how we're moving the needle towards our affordable housing goals. It provides both context and insight for housing policy and planning, and it's a useful resource for a variety of practitioners. So we're very fortunate today to have Dr. Fadali from the Nevada Housing Division here to discuss the current report and its findings with us. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Fadali is the economist for the Nevada Housing Division. She has been working at the Housing Division for the past 7 years, creating not only this report, but a number of other useful reports as well. Betsy has her PhD in resource economics from the University of Nevada, Reno, and has lived in Nevada for nearly 40 years now. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Fadali so that she could provide her presentation. During her presentation, you could type your questions into the chat bar, and after her discussion, we'll leave some time to answer as many of those questions as possible. So thank you again for joining us, and take it away, Betsy.
Hi, it's so great to be with you here today. Boy, I've realized that I'm at the end of my presentation here, and I want to be at the beginning. Oh, shoot. There goes one of my minutes. Oh boy, stop share and share screen again. I should not have left it that way, darn it. Sorry, Hare. Okay. Well, thanks so much for having me this morning. I am really happy to be here to talk with you about the annual housing progress report. I've been involved with it now for 7 years, since 2014. And one of the things that I did for you here is put together all of those years so we have some time series to look at, which I hope are going to be fun. Here is a little bit about the annual housing progress report. It doesn't involve the whole state. It is just certain jurisdictions: Clark and Washoe counties, cities of Henderson, Las Vegas, Mesquite, North Las Vegas, Boulder City, Reno, and Sparks. That's what's included in these numbers. The report came about because of legislation that was passed in 2007, and many of you here, including Hillary, were involved in that and could tell me much more about the history than I can tell you. But the statute requires that these jurisdictions adopt at least 6 of 12 measures that are tools that they are, it allows for the use of these tools and encourages the use of these tools to maintain and develop affordable housing. I am talking here about subsidized housing, including tax credit properties. In other words, almost all of the housing that I'm talking about here today has government oversight, so we can track it and therefore keep this inventory. It's serving households below 120% of area median income, but 99% of the activity involves households under 80% of area median income. So those are the households that we're talking about providing affordable housing for. Every year by January 15th, these jurisdictions have to report to the Housing Division about how they have used these measures to increase affordable housing opportunities. And then by February 15th, we post on our website a report, and those are on the Nevada Housing Division website. Hopefully, Christine's gonna give you a link. I have tried, I think the purpose of this report, part of it is in the name, the Annual Housing Progress Report. So annually, we're looking at what progress we have made. I have tried very hard to make a report where we can compare the numbers over time and across jurisdictions. These are some of the 12 measures. They're written out in that kind of statute language, so very long, so we can't delve into the details of the measures. But some of the things that are included are things like fee reductions, expediting the planning for affordable projects, density bonuses. It includes rental assistance and supportive housing services. Jurisdictions report that, and all kinds of funding help that jurisdictions get involved with affordable projects, donating land, providing money, creating a trust fund, all kinds of funding types of activities. Just so that I'm trying to get your head into my head here. We use a Form 2 that Hillary would probably recognize, where most of the action takes place. The jurisdictions report their activities to me, to the Housing Division through this form. And they tell me what measure they have used. They tell me the name of the project. An example here, City of Las Vegas. They finished a new construction project, city impact, with 51 new units that will have 50 years of restrictions on the rents that can be charged in those units. We can also include things that are just for this one year. It isn't necessarily something that has a ongoing term of restrictions, and those are counted in kind of a separate pile. This is a table right out of the report with a little color added. The main thing that I want for you to look at here is that some of this is recording how many times the measures are reported being used last year. And so you'll notice that when we add them up, certain measures are used a lot more than other measures. So for instance, measure H is used a lot because that would be where, let's say, a jurisdiction is using some home funds that come through those federal funding sources to provide another layer of funding for an affordable housing project to make it a go. Well, that would be reported under this measure H, and that's one of the reasons that that's such a popular one. And you can see there's a lot of use of measures K and L. Well, that has to do with rental assistance and supportive housing. And one of the big stories of 2020 is the CARES Act rental assistance program. And that's one of the reasons those numbers are so huge. And then if you look across and you look at the total measures reported by jurisdiction, you'll see that there's a regional specialization of labor and housing. So in the South, you'll see that Clark County specializes in doing housing, and they do an awful lot of the activity there. There's a lot of cooperation between all of these jurisdictions. It's regional cooperation, which is as it should be. And it's the same in the North, where the city of Reno takes on the bulk of the housing activities. So you'll see that they usually have a large number. Here's another table that we have right from the 2020 report. This is adding up all of those activities to get the number of units or the number of households served for these particular categories. And let's just zero in there on some of the big numbers. The rental assistance, almost 16,000 households assisted this year. And that is by far a record-breaking number there. And again, the reason is the CARES Act housing assistance funding. The pipeline, this is a record also, over 4,000 units. That includes both new construction and preservation units. And that is a record. It's really an exciting number. And despite the pandemic, we continued on with our work here with rehabilitation. So for multifamily, we had 780 units preserved this past year, and we had 528 new multifamily units come online. And I'm just going to follow these very quickly. I'm going to present you the time series. So this is going back and looking at all of the years of the annual housing progress report to see what these numbers were across the years. And here is the number of new units completed. And you'll see there's a nice upward trend. This really is a good news story here. We have some really good activity in 2018, 2019, and this year, despite the pandemic. 734 new units coming online in 2018, 704 in 2019. So some really good looking numbers on that series. Here we have the same thing, only we're talking about preservation rehab projects. And again, we see a kind of a good news story here, especially with this last year. We've got 780 units that have been rehabbed and are ready to go on for another 30 or even 50 years are added to their restrictions most of the time when they are preserved. Getting units preserved is kind of like getting a new roof. You didn't get a new house, you didn't get a new unit, you're just preserving what you have. It's something that has to be done, and it adds those extra years of restrictions on, but it doesn't, 99% of the time, we're not talking about an addition to our inventory levels. This is the pipeline time series, and it's really even better looking than those other ones. We're seeing a nice increase in the number of units in that pipeline. And I think along with those nice numbers that we saw before this portends a really nice, hopefully a couple of years coming up where we'll have good production numbers. Well, we've looked at the inventory, and you've looked at some of the changes that take place over time. This has a lot of numbers. One of the points I want to make with this slide is that for presentation purposes, I'm just telling you about the total numbers. But if you dig into the reports, you'll see you can get all of those same numbers by jurisdiction. So you can go ahead and if you want to get those reports, you'll get all of that juicy detail there. This is tracking the changes in inventory. And one of the big things I want you to notice here is that there's a column called units converted in 2020. And what that means is that along with units coming into our inventory, we have units that are exiting the inventory, and we have to account for those. And that's where the story of our progress gets a little more complicated. Here is our time series of units exiting. And you'll see that in some years we have even over 1,000 units that we have lost from our affordable housing inventory. So that complicates our progress when we go to look at the total net change in inventory. And here are those numbers. For the annual housing progress report jurisdictions, we started out in 2014 with 29,403 units, and by the count that I have, we are now down a little bit to 29,074. So despite that huge amount of activity, we are actually down a little bit in our inventory. Inventory, we don't want inventory just for inventory's sake. We want it because we want to address needs. We want to see fewer evictions. We want to see more stability in families. We don't want to see so much homelessness. That's our ultimate goal. Our ultimate goal is to have fewer households with housing problems. So we have to look at that number to know how we're progressing. Looking at the number of households in need that are having housing problems is kind of our ultimate reality check. So where do we get that? And here I have a total need number. There are a lot of complications that I don't have time to get into, but this is from data that's a tabulation done especially for HUD from the American Community Survey. The CHAS data is what it's called, and that stands for Comprehensive Housing Affordability Strategy numbers. That's where I'm pulling these numbers out of, and this is approximately the number of households under 80% of area median income that have some sort of housing problem. Overcrowding, they have inadequate bathroom or kitchen facilities, Or in most cases, the problem is that they are paying more than 30% of their income for rent. And this is a big number. You can see that's a bigger number than we have, as quite big compared to our inventory that we had. We're working on getting up towards 250,000 just within our annual housing progress report jurisdictions. And so here, so that's kind of our need. And here in the middle, we have our housing effort, the number of subsidized units that we've been talking about. And in addition, we include housing effort for the year 2020 includes the rental assistance that maybe only is going to happen this year, or other kinds of housing assistance that are helping a household with housing, but just for this year. So we add that into the effort, and we get out a measure of need to households assisted. And what I come up with there is a 4. And what that would mean is we have 4 households in need for each household that was assisted. We would prefer to see that number go to 0, because we'd prefer to see that we don't have anybody with housing problems. So smaller is better for that ratio. And then with that background, let's look at these few more time series. Here is our household need number from the annual housing progress report. And you can see that grows. It grows from about 200,000 to about 227,000 over the time period that we've been doing this annual housing progress report. And you can also see, using this CHAS data, we're using it as a proxy, really. It's not the real number, because there's a considerable time lag there. This last number that we have is from 2013 to 2017. Well, why is it growing? And I think the answer is primarily because of population growth. And you can see that more or less the proportion of households with housing need it's huge. It's a quarter of households that have some housing problem, 25%, but it stayed about the same across all that time period. So I think it's growing need, but growing because of population primarily. Of course, this last year brings in a whole new element, of course. And here is our households in need ratio, households in need for each household assisted over this time period. I only had back to 2015 that I had done this measure. But you can see things kind of float along around five households in need for each household assisted. Going up a little, which is not what we want to see, going up a little in the last few years. But then all of a sudden we have, wow, we actually moved the needle. And where is that coming from? That is really coming from all of that rental assistance, all that work you guys did on getting out all of that rental assistance. Now, if you were astute, if you were watching carefully, you'd say, but wait a minute, you didn't include all those households in need, that we had this huge new bunch of people in trouble with their housing this year because of all of the unemployment that occurred due to COVID-19 and all of those impacts. And definitely that is true. And we really would like to be able to take that into account. And I did use an Urban Institute estimate there and came up with just a little bit higher number. In other words, I added in their estimate of COVID impacted households and still came up with a number that says that we did move the needle this year. Is that accurate? We don't really know that number. It's hard to get a fix on that number at this point, but we may have. And so that was an interesting experiment this year. And at the very least, it gives us an idea of the kind of massive amount of funds and work and program and that it takes to move the needle, if indeed we did move the needle. And we also saw this year that work continued despite these wacky conditions that we had because of the coronavirus pandemic. And I put that little heart there for all of you in housing that worked so hard this year despite these weird conditions we've had. And the same for that coronavirus housing assistance program. That was a lot of work. Our pregnant pipeline holds hope for more inventory increases in the next few years, especially if we're able to hold those conversions down to low levels. And hey, it's really difficult making progress on affordable housing. There are a lot of constraints that we all face, and Nevada is not the only place. This is a problem that is facing the entire country. If you're interested in these annual housing progress reports, we have those posted on the website 2018 through 2020. And I think there'll be a link for that. You go to the low-income housing database and scroll down to the very bottom of the page to get those. And if you want other years, please let me know and I'll be glad to give them to you. And with that, thank you again so much for your time and attention this afternoon.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Thank you, Betsy. That was very informative and helpful information. And I know that Christine is going to share some additional information on efforts that the Housing Coalition has to kind of dovetail into the work that you're doing with the annual housing progress report. But before we kind of move on to that, we had a few questions that I just wanted to see if you could provide a definition of inventory. We had a question on how you're defining that. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Okay. I'm using inventory to talk about what I like to use the word subsidized housing. Some people don't like to use that for everything. But what I mean is housing that's involved, connected with a government program so that we're able to track it. Included in the inventory would be all of the tax credit housing, for example, all of the public housing, the HUD, the housing with HUD rental assistance contracts, the housing that has USDA 515, Section 515 housing rental assistance contracts, those kinds of resources.
Great. And then you also mentioned in your conclusion slide about the conversion. So can you just spend a moment talking about what happens to properties that exit and how does that impact us?
You know, it's so interesting, and I wish I could spend a little more time. I have a little project that I have done on this, and I had a unique data set that allowed me to look at what happened to the rents of these former affordable properties over time. And as of 2018, only a handful of our exits had actually gentrified. In other words, raised rents way above affordable levels. Now, the tricky thing is that in the last couple of years, I think we might have seen more of those properties with the rents going up, because one of the reasons that you want to be in the private market is to take advantage of the times when rents are going up. And I suspect that we would have added more of those units would have gone into a gentrified category. but maybe not all of them. And some of them really remain as naturally occurring affordable housing.
Great. Well, and I think that that's a good transition then to you, Christine, to spend a few minutes talking about the Nevada Housing Coalition's efforts. And if others have questions for Betsy, please type them in the chat, and then hopefully we'll have time to get back to questions and answer a few more. Thank you.
Yeah, our goal is to end at 12:45, but we want to save some time for questions. Thanks, Betsy. And thankfully, we don't have that much snow. But if anyone would like to join Betsy and I for some awesome economist and data affordable housing walks, we often do that on the P-Vine behind Betsy with less snow. So I am Christine Hess. I'm the director for the Nevada Housing Coalition, and these slides will be available. I don't want to spend too much time on these, but I do want to just note how our 2021 legislative agenda really ties to a lot of the comments and the information that Betsy provided. And, you know, it's scary. I'll put a link in the chat, but the National Low Income Housing Coalition just released their 2021 gap report. And they do show that huge deficit of affordable housing, like Betsy shows. The need is tremendous in Nevada, so we have got to keep going. And there's a few bills in particular that really relate to this housing report and the tools in it, and I'm going to touch on those. This is our complete agenda here, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I want to touch first on SB 12. Thanks so much. It was heard on March 8th in committee and had a ton of support. I appreciate everybody who supported it. And I would say in the affordable housing world, how can you not? You know, it really, we cannot afford to lose units. They don't all, when they exit, maintain affordability, as Betsy noted, and we certainly can't track them once they exit. And so we need to work hard, and this is enabling legislation. It doesn't mandate enabling at the government level. The legislation does require owners to provide a 12-month notification to 3 entities, if you will, to the Nevada Housing Division, who in turn will notify affordable housing developers that the property is either seeking early termination of its affordability or expiring. To the local governments where it resides, so whether that's the county or sometimes city and county. And it doesn't mandate that city and county do anything, but just that they know that within 12 months, those affordability restrictions are either early terminating or expiring. And then to the tenants, of course, which we all know why. We'd like to give those tenants time for planning, that may change. And there's a lot of technical aspects to the bill. And we made some slight technical revisions, but the bill is really strong. Certainly, we hope everybody here can weigh in and support that. It's tremendous legislation and a huge step in the right direction for Nevada in terms of a preservation strategy. So we're really excited and thankful for the sponsor of this bill, the Nevada Housing Advisory Committee. The 2 bills I'm going to talk a little bit about now are definitely complex, so you won't hear me get into a lot of the complexities, but they very much directly relate to the housing report and the data that Betsy shared, and really to the ability of our local communities to address our affordable housing shortage, which is extreme. We were at crisis levels before the pandemic, and now what? So we need to do something. It's time. AB 334 is sponsored by Assemblywoman Chandra Summers Armstrong. And this is enabling legislation that is adding 2 new tools to the toolbox for affordable housing production and preservation. So these 2 new tools will be added in Chapter 278.250 of NRS, and it's enabling for the local jurisdictions. It enables 2 fees in lieu of inclusionary zoning, which for everybody here, if you didn't know, inclusionary zoning has actually been authorized in statute since 1999 in Nevada, but no community has adopted an inclusionary zoning policy yet. Fees in lieu of inclusionary zoning, so for example, it's mixed income zoning, if you will, right? This development over here must have 20% of its units must be affordable. And we're talking about restricted affordability, as Betsy mentioned. So, however, if you have that policy where 20% of this development must be affordable, a fee in lieu of that inclusionary zoning gives builders choices, right? We appreciate that we have an affordable housing concern, but that's really not our thing to build affordable housing. We don't know how to access the subsidies to make it pencil. So we'll go ahead and pay this fee that a local jurisdiction has prescribed. This happens around the country, very popular in terms of a tool for communities to say, hey, private sector, we need your help. We need you to help us make sure that we get enough affordable housing. So that's one fee that would be enabled. The second fee is called a linkage fee. And this is a fee on new development, either residential, commercial, or industrial. It's directly related to the fact that new development does have an impact on our communities, and the impact is often job creation of jobs that don't pay a housing wage. So for example, a big residential area goes in, the dry cleaners, the barista at the coffee shop that might go in right next to that. Those are typically not housing wages, which housing wages in Washoe County right now in Reno Sparks are about $30 an hour for a 2-bedroom unit. And I think about, oh gosh, Sarah's in the chat, she can correct me, $25 an hour in Las Vegas. So needless to say, our baristas, our dry cleaners, they typically aren't making those housing wages, but they do come as a result and an opportunity of these new developments. And same with commercial and industrial, right? Typically alongside commercial and industrial, you'll see some new retail pop up and other things that have other impacts. So these fees are not meant at all to impede future development. I am a recovering or former economic developer. So I definitely respect and appreciate the significance of adding jobs to our communities and economic development, and would not want to suggest that we don't want new development. We do too. We just need to make sure that these fees don't impede future development. And that's how these fees are set, with stakeholder input. Additionally, we have heard stakeholders already. And in fact, the bill language that has come out actually has caps already on the fees. So local governments can't go above those caps. I mean, that would be the ceiling, not the floor. And we've also exempted, for example, starter homes, right? If it's linkage fees are applied on a square footage basis, if the fees, if the home is less than 1,500 square feet, by all means, shouldn't have a linkage fee on it. Same thing with small businesses, less than 5,000 square feet, not going to have a linkage fee, but you can check out the bill language for the specifics. I don't want to get too technical here. So let's talk about AB 331, which actually amends the chapter that is the annual housing report. So thank you, Betsy. And I'm not going to, again, these details are provided, but what's really exciting about AB 331 is it strengthens this important tool. I saw in the chat, why isn't Carson City there? Man, wouldn't it be cool if we really could systematically track all the progress in the state, because we have such a shortage. We could really identify barriers to using our tools. So first of all, the first thing that AB 331 does, and again, only applying to jurisdictions greater than 100,000 per the legislation that already exists, but it adds the 2 tools that are now enabled by AB 334. So we usually talk about these cousin bills together. It puts them in as the measures that Betsy talked about, right? She gave 12 measures there. Now a local jurisdiction has 2 additional tools that it can report on for its affordable housing progress. Not only that, but it's a balanced portfolio now for our local jurisdictions. Right now, if you look at the tools, the 12 tools available, and you wonder why they're not all being used, well, most of those cost our local jurisdictions something. And how are they getting those resources to fund their financial incentives or to fund the giving of land, which we encourage and want to see happen? Huge shout out to Clark County, by the way. City of Reno did just adopt in 2019 the waiving of fees from SB 103 in 2019, enabling legislation. City of Reno was the first to do it, but Clark County commissioners, thank you so much. They are moving forward to also reduce taxes and fees for affordable housing development, but that does cost the jurisdiction. So these fees, importantly, also would go into a local affordable housing trust fund that is flexible and able to be utilized by the local jurisdictions. There'll be some language in there about that too, not going to go into that. It also directs all the reporting jurisdictions to set a target, which is hugely important. Non-punitive, they're all doing it already, but let's see it in writing. Let's have Betsy talk about it next year. Here's our targets. How are we doing? Encourages the Housing Division to consider those commitments to moving forward. And then additionally, this report has some valuable information. Please, everybody, go to the links. It's hugely important. And we want to make sure that our elected officials are seeing it. So we're asking that in the legislative sessions, it's going to Assembly and Senate Government Affairs and Commerce and Labor. So with that, I am actually going to stop and turn it back over to Hillary.
I was having some user. So I think we're just about out of time. I wanted to go ahead and thank the Housing Coalition again for putting together and kicking off this series, and to Dr. Fadali for joining us and sharing this information. And we will get a copy of the presentation out to everyone who's registered today. We appreciate those who have put some additional topics that they're interested in the chat, and we'll take a look at those as we're planning our future Lunch and Learns. And we hope that everyone will join us again for our next Lunch and Learn in April. So thank you, Betsy. We appreciate your time, and it was a great presentation.
Thanks,
Christina.
everyone.